Peter Vincent joins me now for more on these actions in the works by the new U.S. President. Peter is the Assistant Director General at BORDERPOL, an organization dedicated to developing safe and secure borders. You just heard that story. What strikes me is here's this poor guy, his family stranded over there waiting for them to come, but he said he'd vote for Trump. It's kind of this weird dichotomy. What are your thoughts when you see this story? Because this really is a personal story about people out there who are going to be impacted.
Yeah, it's surprising when I hear this because President Trump has used less than diplomatic language when referring to individuals that are fleeing war and terrorism around the world, and yet to find individuals that actually are refugees from that part of the world who would have still supported him if they had the right to vote, if they had been citizens on election day is a bit disconcerting. There's a bit of cognitive dissonance here, I believe.
Yeah, I agree with you. You wrote a piece in September. I can't read the whole thing. It was in the San Francisco Chronicle. I'll read a bit of it, though. You write, I spent my entire public service career with the U.S. Department of Justice and the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. I worried night and day about terrorists and how they might exploit troubling weaknesses and gaps in our immigration system to carry out a terrorist attack here. One thing that my colleagues and I did not spend much time agonizing about, however, was the Overseas Refugee Processing Program. This president's agonizing over it, and he's very concerned about it. Why did you not worry about it?
Mike, there's no doubt that groups like the Islamic State look for seams and gaps in the national security infrastructure. And refugee flows, or the flows of irregular migrants, might pose a potential gap. However, the process as it has stood for a long time and as it currently stands subjects individuals that are seeking refugee status in the United States to already extraordinarily extreme vetting. They go through a very lengthy process, starting with the United Nations, and their identities are confirmed. They are bounced off a variety of national security databases held by the United States and shared with our allies. And then ultimately, in the case of Syrians in particular, they go through an additional step called the Syria Review Board, where very, very skilled, very experienced, and very talented officers of the Refugee Corps and the Department of Homeland Security's U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services subject them to a number of one-on-one interviews, really pushing their story, engaging in a bit of cross-examination, for instance. It takes, on average, a Syrian refugee 18 to 24 months before he or she is actually allowed to enter the United States. During that entire processing period, they are overseas. They're in refugee camps in Jordan, they're in refugee camps in Turkey, or in places like Lebanon. So there is already extreme vetting going on with these particular individuals. I dare say there are weaknesses in the U.S. immigration and national security web, but the refugee processing program is not one of them.
Let me ask you about how this plays into the hands of ISIL, which has this propaganda machine, and they like to quote U.S. officials if they say things or do things. How does this play into their narrative?
Mike, those of us that work in the counterterrorism, national security world always see everything through a national security prism. And the kind of statements that have been made recently and what we appear to be looking to in the executive order regarding the treatment of refugees and the moratorium for 120 days is actually counterproductive to our efforts to combat violent extremism, because it paints the United States not as a country of hope or of religious or ethnic tolerance. It paints the United States as a country that is unwilling to accept people from different parts of the world, especially those from the Middle East, North Africa, and Muslims. So it unfortunately has the effect, in my experience and opinion, of motivating and inspiring individuals who look to cause damage to the United States and our allies.
You know, I have to ask you this one other question. I'd like to say that you're only on our network. That's not the case. You were in a documentary about El Chapo, and it's interesting they're putting up this wall, but one of the things that I noticed in that documentary watching it is you can actually build tunnels too. There's other ways to get into the United States. Does a wall really have much of an impact?
A wall doesn't have much of an impact. El Chapo Guzman, known as the king of the tunnels, obviously proved that by moving massive amounts of cocaine, heroin, marijuana, methamphetamine under the U.S. border. And we're also have been able to see that they've been able to move weapons from the north to the south as well. So we have done nothing, in my opinion, other than insult our very, very good friends in Mexico who are key to regional security. We don't just deal with Mexico for migration issues or financial issues. It is, of course, the third largest trading partner with the United States, and Mexico has the 11th largest economy in the world. We cooperate with Mexico on counter-narcotics and counter-terrorism matters, and they are key to not just regional security, but to global security. And I'm afraid that we've deeply offended them and insulted them with some of this rhetoric.
It's undoubtedly going to fray the relationship, one would imagine. Peter Vincent, thanks so much for your observations. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mike.